Welcome to the All Out Coach podcast, my friends. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili. I'm your host, CEO, and co-founder of Amedea Pharma, an analytics agency that helps life science organizations improve their performance and engagement with a unique philosophy that merges sportsmanship with the scientific method. As you know, All Out Coach is our opportunity to be introspective, to challenge the conventional norms, stretch ourselves, and lift others. Today, my guest is Johan Lauritsen from Denmark, who is an entrepreneur, medical student, a keynote speaker, also a chronic patient who's crossing the borders between patients and clinical trials, connecting the right patients, educating them, and the healthcare institutions across the globe with his company that he founded called Probe. And so he's going to tell us about a lot of the nuances of how to participate in clinical trials today, why we should participate, and how we can share data more continuously across our healthcare institutions. So I'm very excited to speak to him. Johan, welcome to All Out Coach. Really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Tim. I'm glad to be here as well.
Yes. So would you like to share some of your very unique background with our audience as well?
Of
Because
course.
you're a patient, a medical student, and an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah. Some might say that I'm a bit of a unicorn. I was born with the disease called spinal muscular atrophy, type 2, in short, 5q-SMA2. And basically, it came from a very, very early stage for me that I was very, very interested in life science. And I think it comes to many chronic patients naturally that there is this curiosity and interest because, having a chronic disease is not something that a psychologist can make you, they cannot make it go away. But for me, the way that I've always comforted myself with my chronic disease was that trying to understand what happened within me, what is going on, why do I feel this way, and to understand that we have to ask some, medical biochemical questions to answer, and that's what was my primus motor within what I do today. In my high school, where I was oriented actually in math and physics, but I was attended to a talent pipeline in the University of Aarhus, which allowed me, and also the University of Copenhagen, which allowed me to work on some gene editing. And that is, of course, because my disease is genetic, and I wanted to kind of be better at understanding why is there no gene therapy for me right now. And the most direct for me was to sit at the working table and say, okay, let's do it. What is stopping me? So I worked on something there called prime editing, which is many people might have heard about CRISPR, and this is a CRISPR-based gene therapy that instead of making double-strand breaks in DNA, which causes some issues, then it actually makes very, very precise point mutation on the nucleotides that is affected by the disease. So that interested me, and that got my interest a lot, and that's what drove me to, when I finished my high school, I went to University of Copenhagen to study for a year on something called molecular biomedicine. And there I got a lot of knowledge about, biomedicine in a lot of different ways, chemical pathways, and really, extensive research. But there was like lacking this connection with patients for me. So that's why I decided, and actually also because some friends of mine who were also patients said, why is there no doctors with in a wheelchair? Why is there no doctors with a neurological disorder? And that's where I was like, hey, there's actually a cross point here. So I decided to become a medical doctor to pursue this dream and to show everyone that your disability shouldn't restrict you in becoming a doctor. And then I could actually also talk to patients like myself because I felt like I understood how they felt. And that's what brought me to where I is today.
Yeah. You have a truly unique and inspiring story, Johan, and you've already been breaking new ground for a lot of other patients and students and young entrepreneurs and business leaders also as well. And I think you're introducing a lot of urgency and time sensitivity into healthcare, into researching what we need to research, and it has also some implications on health equity as well, access to care as well, right? And which begins first with research based on your experience and studying CRISPR. Just quick follow up on CRISPR for those that may not be in healthcare. Is there a simple way you can just summarize what that is, for in case some of our listeners are not physicians or in healthcare professionals?
Yeah, definitely. So all organisms have their different ways of protecting themselves against viruses or attacks or bacteria, like we have our immune system.
Mm-hmm.
For bacteria, some bacteria, the case is that they have a part of their immune system that remembers because they have a natural enemy called bacteriophages. And when they attack the bacteria, they actually inject their DNA within the bacteria, which kills them. But when it does not kill them, then they remember the sequence of this DNA, so that if the same bacteriophage or the same DNA that usually kills them is introduced to them again, then because they remember that DNA, they do not die from it. They can actually survive. And there was some researchers saying, wow, this mechanism is actually really interesting.
Yep.
And then they kind of isolated that system. And they said, okay, this is CRISPR. I think it stands for clustered regular interspaced proteojacer motif. It's a really long name. But the point is that CRISPR is a way to change your DNA on specific places.
In specific places. Okay. Great. Of the specific places of the genome.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That are affected by that disease, right? Or that particular.
Yes, you use it a lot therapeutically. Yeah.
Great. Johan, a lot of patients or healthy individuals who are in care of those patients do not really understand what it means to participate in a clinical trial today. So can you describe some of the processes, what people can expect from a clinical trial, and how clinical trials have changed also over the years, and what they are? What is a clinical trial today?
Yeah. So a clinical trial today versus what it might, what many people think that it still is, which it definitely isn't, is that it is not some Schumann experimental lab where you just give you some random chemical and saying, yeah, maybe drink this. Okay, he died. What a shame. Let's try a new one. But a clinical trial is currently the most time-consuming part of developing a new therapy for especially chronic patients, right? Chronic diseases is the group of diseases where medication is needed the most, because by definition, a chronic patient is a patient that doesn't have treatment. So currently clinical trials, as it is right now, it is divided into different phases. And there are three main phases of the clinical trials. So first, you make some animal testing as a researcher. You look at, okay, how does the mouse respond to this medication? Maybe you inject it, maybe you stretch it, I don't know, something, right? Depends on the therapy. And then when you kind of have the data that suggests, okay, there's some biomarkers that shows that this mice is benefiting from the treatment. Usually you give the mice a disease and then you try to treat it. And then you also see that there's not significant injuries, that it doesn't get sick. There's not anything there's not any health risk related to giving the mice the disease. And when you've done enough documenting on animals, then you proceed to humans. And you start with a very, very low population. This is the phase 1 of clinical trials. And here you have maybe, I don't know, 5 people, maybe 3 people that is trying this therapy. It is high risk in cases of, maybe progressive diseases like Alzheimer's, for example. Then there's a high willingness because you are ready to try anything to try to maybe get a cure. But actually, you've eliminated a lot of the risk already by doing extensive research on mouse models, for example, right? Or on monkeys. And then when you try at these participants, if it's healthy volunteers, for example, they get some compensation, they get some money for being a part of it, but most of all, they get to know that they're actually making a major contribution toward curing diseases and improving the global health. And then they move on. If it passes there, we see, okay, these 5 individuals, usually maybe 5 healthy, maybe versus 5 with a current disease. It's called the control group. And you also have some placebo, which means that you give a fake version of the therapy that you're testing, such that you can document that the therapy is actually working and that it's not just anything randomly occurring.
Yeah.
Point being is that then you move on to phase 2. There's enough safety, there's enough efficacy. Okay, then there's maybe 30 participants. Okay, here the recruitment part starts to be like getting trial participants starts to be a concern because, okay, now we didn't only need 5 participants, now we actually need 30 because you have to have enough data in humans to suggest that you could apply it in the global market and that everyone can use it safely.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And here you have probably the same criteria for the participants, but there's just more data that needs to be generated, and maybe you made some slight adjustments. And then at the last phase, when you say, okay, it's safe for the 30 people as well, then you maybe need 300 participants. And here, in many, many cases, the recruitment part, recruiting participants for clinical trials becomes extremely difficult because, for example, for me, SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, in Denmark, there's approximately 150 patients.
In the whole country? And
in the whole country.
Yeah. And how about globally? How many patients are there?
I don't know. I don't think that there's very good data on that, but it's one in a couple of maybe 300, 400 every year that gets born. But it's rare, and obviously in the US, for example, there's more because the population is bigger.
Is there routine testing in prenatal testing is 5-QSMA one of the?
Yeah, fortunately, it wasn't there when I was born. But seriously, and I mean, this is a very good question, Tim. It's like 1 month ago, 1.5 months ago, they implemented prenatal screening nationally on all hospitals in Denmark. So it's very, very recent that you actually do this, but now we do it. For me, for my case, when I was 3 years old, I fell. Then I couldn't stand up again. And then my mother was like, okay, there's something wrong here. And then you go to the neurology department. Well, actually, you go to the physician in Denmark, and then they send you to the neurology department. Mm-hmm. And then they say, after some genetic screening, when they see that you have this many backup genes of SMN2, and you see that you're very weak, okay, then you conclude by this genetic and motor function measurement screening that, okay, he has spinal muscular atrophy.
Right.
As a reaction, right, instead of a screening.
Sure. Okay. Well, I know that patients with 5-QSMA, I believe, have participated in Olympics, not only, but they have won even in sports Olympics, as well as in medical innovation Olympics that we participated in this year, where you won the evidence generation category, by the way, which I want to make sure that those who listen also know. So you participated this year, and which was a first first ever event, inaugural event. But yeah, so I know you were explaining the clinical trial mechanics a little bit.
As proceeding to phase 3, where you need a lot of volunteers, and that becomes difficult as you're suddenly running out of patients. And usually you're not thinking, as you just mentioned, what is the population worldwide instead of nationally. Usually researchers and the researchers listening here will probably give me agree with me on this one, because they tend to look nationally because they know their democracy better. Of course, there's like sometimes requirements. It said that this trial is only testing it on maybe Hispanic, Latino, or white Caucasians, and that is, there's no racist reasons for this. It's purely medical reasons, because people with different ethnicities actually respond differently to medicine. But that's the only demographic restriction there is. Otherwise, it's, in my opinion, weird that we don't look outside the borders. But when you finish phase 3 trial, there's something called phase 4, but it's not usually the problem. It's the phase 1, 2, and 3, and then you go to market. Actually, then in the US, I guess they make an application to the FDA, and when the Federal Drug Agency says, "Okay, that's great," or the Food and Drug Administration, that's probably the
that's
right. Right?
Yes,
and then the FDA approves it, and then it's usually being taken into the normal, packages that you have in your insurances, and you can go to the hospital, and the doctors will prescribe it. And in Denmark, or in Europe, actually, it's pretty much the same. It's just the European Medical Council that does the same thing as FDA, right? And when they've given the approval, then you can actually go to market. Then you can actually apply it for the patients, and you've actually managed to create a treatment for a disease.
Sure. Okay. So that's helpful. Now, how has the data exchange and generation accelerated through some of the more modern approaches to clinical trials? We hear about decentralized clinical trials, which some of our listeners may know about on this podcast, because I think the important point of what your description was there is that it's the most time-consuming part of drug development, because for a lot of the patients, participating in a clinical trial represents a lot of hope, a lot of very, very tangible, very critical hope, right? To receive benefit, therapeutic benefit for a rare disease, for a cancer or something like that, right? So how can they participate in trials that evolve quickly and that they can know results of as soon as possible? Are you seeing improvement in the speed of clinical trial?
First and foremost, it's happened very recently that we've started talking about clinical trials as a crucial factor in drug development. And that realization has to be done, and it has only been done very recently, which is terrific in my opinion. And then for the development of trials I've seen is since there's been this focus on the recruitment part of the trials, because that is actually one of the major issues. One is like, how do you get people to participate? This is from the point of view from the researcher, but not from the patient, which there is still a gap between those. The criteria for the clinical trial participants are more loose now. We had very, very strict criteria, especially when it comes to muscular dystrophies, like SMA is a part of that disease group. Then the clinical trials tend to be characterized by very extensive trial criteria, right? You have to have almost for my case, for example, I had to know what my motor function measurement 32 score was. I had to know how many backup genes of SMN2 I had, and a lot of like very specific points, and sometimes even down to the single point mutation in the DNA. And for this is one landscape. This is the muscular dystrophies. This is one landscape within the chronic diseases. But then when you look at, for example, diabetes, it's not as problematic in terms of the trial criteria because it is diagnosed in a different way. And that means that it is harder recruiting for muscular dystrophies. And maybe sometimes you should look at, there's been in the trial evolution over time, there's been a focus that we should look at the population and the demography of our trial participant before we actually publish the trial, because it costs a lot of money to go out and say we have a look at the population, but we have a trial for this disease and we need 3,000 patients and we have 3 months to recruit 3,000 patients, and it's one physician that has to do all of the recruitment, and it's like that's a bit ambitious. And you should probably say maybe you should go for 1,500, because if you look at the data of the participants and the participant pool, then you will see that there's not enough participants, right?
I see. So one of the gaps you've outlined from speaking to many pharma companies is they don't do sufficient due diligence in epidemiological planning prior to initiating a clinical trial. Is that?
Yeah, basically they don't have enough focus about what is realistic inclusion criteria in terms of what's available out there in terms of patients.
Well, I've seen some data also, Johan, that, out of all of the minority populations, for example, that would be eligible across the spectrum, let's say, and that would be 40%, only 15% of them are included in clinical trials, are actually participate in the clinical trials. So our clinical trial populations are not very representative. Right. So, which is what you have mentioned before, which you alluded to. But in some of this data that I've seen, I think confirms that from McKinsey and from others just that I saw this week. So what is your company Probe doing to help increase access to care and clinical trials? Maybe you can speak a little bit about and introduce your company.
I would love to. So first and foremost, the whole reason that I am very sure that the reason that brought us to where we are today, the success we have is only because I realized I had a very difficult time participating in the trial in the US being a Danish citizen. And I was like, I want to participate in this trial. And I do actually even though many chronic patient doesn't have that knowledge, I do have the knowledge to know that I fit the trial. But the doctors that I went to in Denmark didn't even know what the standard procedure was to send me to the US, even though I just was like, yeah, you don't have to think, I read it for you. And that guarantee is not something that patients can provide to their physicians when they want to be a part of clinical trials. Patients want to attend to clinical trials, first and foremost, because as you mentioned earlier, it's giving them hope, but also because, you're doing something great for your own patient population. Healthy volunteers, which is a requirement in almost all clinical trials as control groups, they have to undergo the same therapy as the patients to ensure that it still works only for the patients and not for the healthy participants. That is the reason they should participate. And this is where our engagement part comes in, is that as maybe a close relative to someone with a chronic disease, you're frustrated. Your family member, he's getting worse, right? Maybe he's not, but he's feeling miserable. You would wish that maybe even though you had a lot of money, but it doesn't work, the drug isn't there. You have a lot of expertise, but it doesn't work. The most direct way that close relatives can help is to participate in clinical trials themselves. This is why we also do voluntary work, right? It's because we are we're one big family of human individuals that are trying to help the quality of life. And this is where Probe comes in. So while establishing a community of people that wants to be a part of clinical trials, we're giving this community of people that we're slowly trying to gather them in one big bank of participants. We're developing a tool that makes clinical trials accessible for them.
I
It
see.
means that, and then you might think, well, yeah, of course I want to be a part of a clinical trial. It's a good story, but I'm not sure that I have the same knowledge as you, and I don't know how to
Right.
read trials. That's what we're addressing as well. So and this is where it comes into a key political discussion. It is that your data, your healthcare data, those are your data. Those are not the data of the government. Those are not the data of anyone else. It's your data. And you decide what you get to do with these data. And you can enable your health data to actually do the thinking for you. The thing that I had to do the manual way by reading the criteria, the data can help you with that. So we're developing an algorithm that, based on your health data and the trial exclusion and inclusion criteria, suggests relevant clinical trials for you. It says your health data meets these criteria, and this is why you get these trial suggestions. And that
Okay.
means that you've already done the screening for the physicians. Usually when I go out and I say, hi, I want to be a part of the clinical
Right.
trials, then the physician has to ask a gazillion of questions
Right.
because they have to be sure that the participants fit their description. But that thing is no longer needed when you have the algorithm that we've developed.
Okay, so
Yeah.
just to provide a little bit more detail now, right, as follow-up. So if a patient is not very literate, they don't know a lot about their condition, they cannot answer some of those detailed questions that you mentioned, the nucleotides, right, involved in SMA, for example. Your algorithm proactively assesses their condition by asking those questions through a tool, through a is it an app? Is it a what kind of tool is it?
It is it's
Yeah.
a mobile and web-based app.
Okay.
We think that mainly the researchers will use the web because they upload their trials there
I see.
and can handle trial participants there. And we think that the patients will usually use the mobile app because that's the most easy to use thing.
Okay.
And yeah, so just to clarify what we actually have, it
Yeah.
is an app that shows you all of the trials that your health data fits on. And it gives you a very quick view. What is the trial? What are you supposed to go through? What interventions is there? And then there's an apply button where you simply click, and then you'll get linked with the researcher.
Yeah. Great.
And it saves time for the patients, and it saves time for the researchers. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think you're addressing such a real world gap there, because I think first of all, a lot of patients do not know what condition they have, the diagnoses as they go from one institution to another. You cannot expect them to know all of the clinical trials out there. So your company has access to a global database of trials, as I understand it, right? Just a very
It's
across various
important.
all conditions, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's important. It's important to mention here that there's a very important notion, and that's maybe because we're a Danish company. I don't know. There's a lot of regulatives, but it's like we don't have access to global health data without people's permission. But what people do is that they go into our page or our app, and then they say, "Hi, I will put my data here." And when you've given consent to that, we have a totally secure encrypted system that uses the data that you put here in our cloud server.
Yep.
Only for the purpose that we say. We cannot go and see your data. It suggests your clinical trials, and that's what it does. So it's not, unfortunately, it would be very nice if there was like a very big database, but what we actually do is just simply say, put your data here, and then this algorithm fixes the rest. And then you can apply for the trials that you want to be a part of.
Okay, a quick question again on the data, just the medical records, labs, for example, laboratories. can they be uploaded from a patient's doctor, from a patient's last hospital visit, for example?
Yeah. So I think here, because we want to, unlock the potential of clinical trials, then we have to address that there's different procedures in different countries because we're
Yeah.
going global, right? We have to have a global collaboration to have enough trial participants. And in terms of your question, Tim, in the US, it would be possible for physicians to ask their patient, "Hi, would you like to? There's this trial, and you fit it, and maybe you would like to try it." And then the patients can give consent to their physician, and then they can upload the data if they will.
I see. Okay.
Also,
the reason why, sorry to interrupt, the reason why I asked that, Johan, is because some patients may not know some of their the responses to the questions in your app. So they may need some help, probably, I imagine, from a physician, right?
Yeah, or we're also also there's of course also access for close relatives that help confused patients get trials.
Okay. It's a huge initiative that, again, I repeat to everyone, it gathered a lot of attention, and you'll be hearing more from the Medical Affairs Professional Society, another podcast that Johan will be a guest on, and an article from Innovate article there. I'd like to ask you who are part of the team, the probe team. Also, who do you work with to make this a reality? And what stage is the app in now? Is it currently available to patients and their users?
So great question. So first, the question in terms of the team.
Yeah.
There's me, which I've told a lot about already, and then there's my co-founder Nikolai, and he is a AI and mathematics student at the Danish Technical University, which means that he has a more like technical understanding of how you make optimal the algorithm optimal, how you program it, and what your concerns should be, right? In terms of the software part. Then you have our third and last co-founder, as it is right now. We're actually looking into boarding a co-founder more. And her name is Huda, and she's a physician, PhD student, endocrinologist. She's working with the diabetes patients right now. And we found each other because she read about me in the Danish newspaper, and she was like, I thought about the exact same idea, but just for researchers, not for patients. And then we kind of met and had this symbiosis. And then I also met Nikolai. But that's our founder team. That's our lead structure right now.
Okay.
So it means that we're obviously only 3 people working full time on this, which is we need more hands, obviously.
Sure.
But we have some prototyping done, and this prototyping and MVP is being developed by 2 software engineering students groups at the Danish Technical University.
Okay.
And we're guiding them and leading them, saying how we think it should be developed, and then they program something, and then we go to the Danish Diabetes Association and we ask them, what does the actual patients think of this? And then we ask our partner hospitals, what do researchers think of their interface? And then they might say, this is not good enough. And then we go back to the software groups and saying, okay, this is something that needs to be done to make the optimal application. And as you can maybe hear, the app is under development, but we are expecting release within the end of January. I can pretty comfortably say, and it will be a simple version. We'll try to gradually implement all disease groups, but like realistically speaking, we might start with diabetes, to ensure that it's closed before you unleash the hounds.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Johan, thank you very much for creating this huge global opportunity, which ultimately means that we can advance healthcare with that urgency and that passion that you bring. I think that I hope a lot of patients will tune in, connect with you, in order to bring probe to more patients across the globe, more researchers. I am a huge fan of yours, of your company, and a big supporter. And so you'll be hearing a lot more about Johan Lauritsen, my friends, and about Probe that can help many more patients participate in the correct trials, give not only hope, but options, and also results through patient summaries, lay summaries afterwards, as well, that you can know the results of your data, of the trials that you participated in as well. So, Johan, I just want to leave the last word to you. At All Out Coach, our slogan is stretch yourself, lift others. You are breaking new ground and actually operationalizing this huge gap in healthcare access, health equity. So please, what is your call to action to our listeners and to the All Out Coach show?
I say that the most important thing that I can stress here is that when you're facing a problem as a patient, as a researcher, researchers are patients as well. Just remember, whenever you encounter problems and you try to fix this problem, whenever someone criticizes your solution, just remember that the idea of your solution came from your own problem and it came from your own need, and nobody can take that away from you. So keep going no matter what people say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johan. What a great way to finish this conversation for now, but we'll continue our dialogue. Thank you. Thank you, Johan, very much.
Thank you, Tim.